Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see everybody here today. We've got almost a full crowd here in Harlan Hall on campus in Lincoln, and I know that we have a number of our colleagues that are joining us across the state by the streaming that we're doing of the session out to our colleagues that are in the district research and extension centers and our extension folks spread throughout the counties. I thought it was pretty important for us to gather today. And as you'll recall, we had this set up a couple of weeks ago, originally in the first week of the fall semester, and we chose to delay today's discussion until now because we wanted to put it in the context of the overall university. And some of the things that you now know that our Chancellor has told us about goals for UNL moving forward over the next 6 years and what that's going to mean for us, and how we're going to need to respond to that as well in IANR. I thought it was also pretty important for us to have a follow-up discussion to what's happening in the IANR to 2025 process that you've heard about, first in January when we gathered for a session like this in the East Union, and then since during the spring semester and the summer as the teams that we assigned to work on various areas of the Institute brought forward recommendations that I'm going to share with you today and tell you a little bit about what has come out of that process. So we'll spend a little bit of time here in the front end this afternoon, and I'm going to tell you I have a hard stop because I have a daughter in the homecoming court in Sutton, Nebraska tonight at 7 o'clock. So I have orders from my wife, and I actually have a shock device on me that at 5 o'clock I am to be out this door, which I'm sure will not make any of you too upset as well on a Friday afternoon. So first of all, I think it's important for us to review a little bit of what's changed in the last 8 months since this kind of group was together in the Institute. And there are quite a few things, both within the university and external to us, that have changed around us that influence the way we think about going forward. I mentioned the 2025 process. I want to lay out for you how that was done, how it's been done to date, what the implementation steps are for that now moving forward, including the first recommendations, 30 of them, that we are in the process now of implementing as we move into this school year. And then the last part of the discussion I want to have with you is how I think that something that we need to pay careful attention to is that community and balance matters, especially as we move forward and we take on some of the goals that are pretty audacious for us, both at the university level and within the Institute. So, what's changed? So think back to January. We were in a session in early January at the start of the spring semester when we weren't quite sure what our budget was going to look like. We had some indication that state budget could be bad. We had some indication that it might not be as bad as we had originally thought due to the nearly $1 billion deficit that the state was trying to deal with in the legislature. We now know the outcome of that, and we now know that we're positioned quite well as a result of not having a budget cut at the state level, at least in terms of a flat budget over the next biennium period. That $12 million that's there for the current fiscal year is what we currently stand in the state for this fiscal year in tax receipts behind what the expectation was. So the state's watching that closely. We're not too concerned at this point because we've had several up months. The last couple have been a little shakier, Alan, I think you would say, but we're quite encouraged at tax receipts, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes in terms of what impact ag receipts I expect will have on us as an institute. You know that $25 million was allocated in the state legislature to Innovation Campus for its initial development. I just came from the quarterly board meeting half hour ago of the Innovation Campus Development Corporation Board, and I can assure you that things are moving forward very rapidly, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that this morning or this afternoon. Recurring domestic and global economy issues linked to the next one in terms of negative ramifications of dealing with the federal debt. And we've watched that play out in the way that the 2011 appropriations finally happened in April, and we're now paying careful attention to what that's going to mean for us in the federal level, as I'll show you in a bit relative to our budget. We are experiencing a booming agricultural sector at the moment in Nebraska in a way that is perhaps unprecedented in the history of the state. And I'll tell you a little bit about what that looks like. And we have escalating foundation resources that are accumulating, many of them around the mission areas that we have in IANR. So let's talk a little bit about state funding. We are one of 3 states, I list the 3 that are there, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Wyoming, that are in a growth mode relative to universities and relative to our support from the state legislature. And if you know your colleagues in South Dakota, you know your colleagues in Iowa, you know your colleagues in Missouri, you know that they are not as fortunate as we are, along with others that are in much deeper holes like Illinois and California and Texas. UNL is currently overall, as a campus, 21% state funded, which puts us on the highest end, if you will, of the APLU universities, the American Public Land Grant universities. If you consider that IANR, as our portion of the budget, we reflect about 27% of UNL's budget in IANR programs. We're almost 50% state funded in our programs affecting IANR. And I think that's something that's important for you to understand and for you to know. One of the reasons we pay such careful attention, if you will, to state appropriations. This does allow us, because of the state funding that we have the availability to now, to be in a relative growth position relative to our peers. And that is something that I think we have to take advantage of, and you're going to hear me talk about that relative to faculty hiring, relative to adding to our programs and growing momentum. Much of the positive state funding happens to be tied to the booming agricultural economy. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, how we're experiencing records in terms of what we expect ag receipts and net income per operation to be in the state for 2011. Now I just want to update you briefly on Innovation Campus because a lot has happened there since January. You hear the theme mentioned of food, fuel, and water around Innovation Campus, and I want to dispel a little myth here. There are folks on our campus that believe that that means that the theme of Innovation Campus is IANR. I would wager to you that that means that the theme of Innovation Campus is food, fuel, and water, broadly across our campus, broadly across those that can contribute to those areas, including engineering, including arts and sciences, including our colleagues across other colleges in the campus. And I think we need to remember that. It positions us well for what we do in the Institute, but we want to pull our other colleagues in other parts of the university into that theme as well. This is the now new development plan for Innovation Campus. This is the full build-out plan, if you will, that we have approved in the Development Corporation Board. And Phase 1 that you've been hearing about specifically refers to the part of the campus surrounding the original 4-H building, that is the now building that remains along with the Industrial Arts building of the State Fair campus. The plan for the funding of that is that $10 million of that 25 that the state has allocated to Innovation Campus will go into the renovation of the 4-H building, into a conference facility as well as partnership space for tenants that will be in that facility as well. And then a life sciences facility that will be adjacent to that, it's not really shown that well in this particular rendering, that will house partnership work in food, fuel, and water. $15 million of the $25 million went into that particular leveraging. We now have the additional private funding of $15 million raised for that facility as of earlier this week, along with a $10 million gift that will support program in that building. So we're very excited about that and the opportunity to develop that further. We spent quite a lot of time this afternoon in the board talking about this part of the site, which you'll recognize as the Industrial Arts building. That is now part of the Innovation Campus footprint. It was received as property to the Development Corporation Board this afternoon. And there is discussion now about how that facility may be developed for reuse, and including how it might house greenhouse space that would be important to our colleagues in IANR, and a plant phenotyping laboratory system that we now have the funding to provide to our researchers. This is a rendering of the 4-H facility. You'll notice this is the portion that is the existing renovated 4-H arena, part of which will become conference facilities as an anchor for the site. The remainder, as I said, tenant and retail, some retail space. This is a new facility that the developer has matched to allow us to expand the footprint of that building and maintain the architectural integrity of the building so that we don't have to put elevator shafts in the 4-H building. So you'll notice it's connected by a sky bridge that will allow access to the 4-H building for those that need to do that in the second floor through this new facility. So we're quite pleased about that. The leveraging of the development corporation has moved us from $25 million of state funds. The matching that has occurred with the developer puts us to an $80 million figure, including that private $15 million figure that I showed you earlier. So the developer is matching us one for one with all of the state dollars and the private dollars that are going into these facilities. So we're quite excited about that. I mentioned that Nebraska is in an unprecedented time relative to agriculture, and I really believe that to be true. Ag receipts, our Ag Econ colleagues tell me, are expected this year to top $23 billion in the state of Nebraska. The previous record high of about 3 years ago was under $18 billion. So that gives you some indication of the impact that high commodity prices are currently having on ag receipts. Ag net income projected to be at $5.8 billion. Previous record was in the high $3 billion range, again about 3 years ago. So a tremendous amount of income in the state being generated currently off of agriculture. That is impacting land prices in the state. They're expected, according to the Federal Reserve, to escalate an additional 22% this year. I can tell you personally, our family has land in Clay County. We had land that neighbors us in recent weeks sell for $12,000 an acre for irrigated farm ground. When my mother passed away 3 years ago, we were dealing with whether we thought we had it valued appropriately at $3,000 an acre. So you can see, well, the impact that that's having, including that the generational transfer of land in the state that we see happening in this current 5-year period that's estimated to be in value around $82 billion statewide that we'll see happen in transferring from one generation to the next. The foundation, Ann Bruntz is here today. We've had tremendous success with our foundation capital campaign since January. We had a $1.2 billion 5-year goal in that capital campaign system-wide. The pledges for that now exceed $1.40 billion. So we're very near that $1.2 billion goal in IANR. You'll remember me saying in January that there was a $49.4 million goal in the campaign originally for IANR. We now have exceeded almost $87 million in gifts that are reflected toward IANR, which is tremendous for us. I've said in January that we should have a goal of roughly 4 times what that original goal was. Ann kind of grunts at me every time I say that, but I really believe that we're on track to see that happen by the end of the campaign a couple of years down the road. Here's the red flag. If you're watching the federal budget debate, you'll recognize that there is quite a bit of concern about where dollars are going to be recaptured in the federal appropriations and the discretionary spending in particular. These are 3 formula funds that come to us from the federal government to support IANR programs. Smith-Lever funds support extension activities. The Hatch Act, of course, supports the experiment station through formula funds, and McIntyre-Stennis specifically supports forestry related programs. This is our current level of funding in IANR from those 3 lines for fiscal year 11, which is down was reduced slightly from fiscal year 10. And the percentages of our straight line budget in those divisions that they impact of those funds. Based on what we've seen in the Senate and in the House up to this point for fiscal year 12, which will start in October, those reductions fall in the 9 to 15% range. And honestly, I'm not so sure those aren't optimistic, that we might see larger cuts than that. So that's of concern to us. Not a huge issue, but of concern to us, and we're watching that carefully. The greater issue is this one. These are the competitive funds at USDA, where we currently have a federal funding level of $262 million in the AFRI line. That's slated for about a 13% decrease based on the Senate and the House marks. That's substantial. Why? The AFRI funding went into large cap grants that are 5-year grants, so there was promise of future funding coming to those that would support those through the out years. We've got to watch this carefully because we have some of those funds in-house that you'll see in a few minutes. We also have to be concerned about how that increases the competitiveness for those funds. Fewer funds, more people trying to get those funds, as you know, across the university system nationwide, and that creates a competitive hill to climb, if you will, realizing that's just USDA. NIH is not facing quite that decline. NSF is not facing a decline. So those opportunities there, as well as at DOE, which supports quite a bit of our work. So the timing has never been better to rethink the way we fund a lot of the things we do, and you heard me say that in January. It's even more important now, I think, for us to look for new partnerships, to look for partnerships on Innovation Campus, to look for endowed funding, to look for international engagement that will allow us to have partnerships across the globe in key areas. We're doing a lot of that. This slide didn't have as many of these names on it a year ago. There are names that are getting added to those kinds of relationships and partnerships that we have across all 3 of our mission areas in the Institute. I expect that we'll see that grow. And this isn't certainly all inclusive. There are many others that you might add here in a smaller sense. These kind of people are game changers for us. One of them's here today. I didn't expect him to be here, but he's here for the game tomorrow, and he showed up to keep me accountable. Where's Paul at? And right here on the front row, Paul Engler is here with us, and I'd like for you to give him a round of applause. But those kind of gifts are enabling us to do things we've never been able to do before. I'm going to Denver Tuesday night next week to meet with a lawyer who might have impact on the Engler Agribusiness Entrepreneurship Program, who contacted us because she'd heard about it. She was number 1 in her class in the Wisconsin Law School. Those kinds of people that have interest in these areas are attracted to those kinds of developments. So Paul, thank you very much for your generosity. Keith and Norma Heerman from Phillips, Nebraska, you're going to hear me talk a little bit about them later, have recently given us another gift on top of support they've long-term had for the Agronomy and Horticulture Department. Bob Dougherty, recently deceased, the founder of Valmont Industries, that's enabled the Water for Food gift that you've heard so much about. I was in Omaha Wednesday night with the Capital Campaign Executive Committee, talking about what the last 2 years are going to look like. The 2 areas that are on their plate as the highest priority areas are global engagement, which is President Milliken's, one of his very high priorities that you've heard about, and this is the other one. Ag Life Sciences focused on food for the future, where we are seeking to grow the Center for Plant Science Innovation, the Gut Function Initiative, the Virology Center, Food for Health that our colleagues in the Food Science and Technology Department have scoped, and a new Center for Red Meat Innovation as well to match those efforts. So we're excited about what that future will hold, and we think that we have lines on quite large grant monies. I mentioned earlier that we need to think about different funding streams to support what we do and to replace some of that federal funding. I mentioned an $82 billion transfer of generational land in the state of Nebraska that we are currently experiencing. I would like to hope that some of those resources will be reinvested locally and will be reinvested to support long-term outreach efforts locally through Extension. And we met earlier this morning with advocates of the Extension program to talk to them about that. Here's another thing that's very good, and I want to congratulate you for your success in this. This is our external grants and contracts success so far in fiscal year 12. Last year, the Institute was at about $70 million in total in external grants and contracts. This year, we're at 29.8 so far. Now, there's some of those that haven't made their way through sponsored programs, but we know we're getting them. The awards have been notified, which puts us at a 73% increase over this time, year over year last year. Now, that is affected by a couple very large grants that groups in our faculty have been successful in achieving, and I applaud you all for doing that and continuing that success. This has certainly changed. Sometimes I get a little tired of hearing about it, real honestly. I shouldn't say that on web stream, but oops. It's a great thing to be part of the Big Ten, right? Enough said. It's a great thing to be part of the Big Ten and to join the institutions, like we did July 1st, that are part of the Big Ten. But you've seen this slide. We're one of the smallest two campuses with Northwestern in terms of total student enrollment, so we're small by comparison. But in ag and natural resources and the human sciences areas that we have in IANR, we're in pretty good company. Because if you look at how well we're cited globally, and you look at our U.S. competition, we actually are in the top end of the Big Ten, if you will, in terms of how well our work is reflected globally according to these data from Thomson Reuters. We also are the only land-grant institution in the Big Ten that's recognized by the Pew Foundation for innovative teaching efforts through our efforts in Kasner. We're not the biggest enrollment in ag in the Big Ten, but we certainly are in the middle. These data are a couple of years old, the latest release of data from the Big Ten that we could get. How much growth there's been in the last 2 years, we know we have grown considerably. We're at about 2,400 undergraduate students now. So whether we're up there with the others ahead of us or not yet is to be determined. We are one of the highest in-state residence states in the Big Ten. If you look at us over here on the third bar, along with the University of Illinois and Michigan State. So there's some opportunities there for us. We are certainly the highest value in the Big Ten. And when you talk about the expected enrollment growth that we're talking about, part of it is built on the idea that students can come here, receive a very high quality education at a much more affordable rate than they can in their home states in the Big Ten. Now I want to spend just a second addressing this issue. If you heard Harvey's State of the University address a couple of weeks ago, he made a statement, something to this effect on the bottom. And it was in reference to the AAU and our removal from the AAU. And he said that we are not willing to abandon our principles as a land-grant institution in terms of the kinds of research and teaching and outreach that we do, or our accessibility to the stakeholders in our state as a land-grant university in order to meet the ideals of a group. And I absolutely was glad to hear him say that, because he's absolutely right. I want to invite to the stage Eric Hunt, who is a PhD student here in the School of Natural Resources. And some of you may remember that he wrote a piece that ended up in the Chronicle about the time that the AAU discussion was occurring, where he basically reflected these thoughts on his own, where he took the initiative to write to the AAU and say that we were going to stand behind who we are as an institution in order to achieve the mission that we've had. And what we have done, he doesn't know we were going to do this, but we have framed this for him because he said it so well. And if you haven't seen it before, I would encourage you to look it up on the Chronicle. Let's give him a round of applause for his efforts. Congratulations. So, I haven't talked a lot about the AAU. I knew about it in January when we met because we were deep in the throes of the discussion about how we were going to justify what we were doing in the AAU. And I stood behind the principle all the way through that of we needed to do what we were best at and not worry about the ideals of a group that perhaps was a little more elitist in their view. I will tell you that we are not the last institution that is being considered for whether they should belong to the AAU or not. And our colleagues in the land grant system, those who voted for us to stay, are the ones who are worried and concerned about whether that reflects the ideals of the organization moving forward. It'd be great to be part of the group, but we're in a different place. You heard this since January, and I'm going to refer quite a bit to this in our 2025 discussion. The Chancellor has said that we should be a 30,000 student institution 6 years from now, by 2017. That we should have a faculty of 1,300 tenure track faculty, which is a gain of 160 faculty above the VSIP lines, the voluntary separation retirement program we just went through, above those lines, back to the baseline of what we were before that. Graduation rate that should go from 63% currently, a little under 64% on a 6-year basis, up to 70%, so about 1% a year over those 7 years of time period. Research expenditures, $300 million from the current $191 million that we report to NSF. Those appear to be pretty big numbers when you think about them proportionally, right? 5,000 students is about 20% growth for us if we think about how we're going to do that when the number of high school graduates in Nebraska is not increasing, where we're going to pull those students from. And Innovation Campus Phase 1 to be complete by that time and hopefully entering Phase 2 in the development stage. Here's what I think that means for us. And I've challenged our leadership in Kasner to talk about what do these student goals mean for us. We currently are at a base of a little over 3,000 total students, 2,400 roughly undergraduates, 650 roughly graduate and professional students. That includes all majors agriculture, so it does include our biochem friends in arts and sciences and BSE and ag engineering and engineering. That's up, as you know. It's been consistently going up over the last period of 6 to 7 years. And the numbers I think we need to shoot for is if they were 27% of the university's budget, there's no reason we shouldn't be 25% of that growth. Because the job market is there for the students studying in the majors that we offer across the institute, and the time is right for us to continue to increase those students as we move forward. Those look like big numbers. When you consider what has been happening, I know this is a little hard to see, I would dwell on the right-hand side. We've been seeing that kind of growth in the program over the last 7 years. Where that threshold of diminishing return is, I don't know. We won't know till we hit that, but there is opportunity out there for us, especially if we consider states like Illinois and Minnesota, where we have a ripe field to pull out-of-state students, as well as increasing our yield of Nebraska resident students over that time. There is lots of room for growth. These are 2010 numbers. They're not updated for this fall, so these would be a little bit off of what you are currently seeing in your programs. But there is opportunity here. You can look across that list of majors and see plenty of places where we have capacity and opportunity to grow our student body with quality students. I'm absolutely convinced of that. I'll use my home department of animal science. I'll pick on my colleagues that are closest in the field I'm in. They've seen growth to 263 students. There's no reason we shouldn't be a 400 to 450 student department in a state like Nebraska. So there's opportunity for us to grow those student numbers. Graduation rates. Here's what's troubling about graduation rates. Now, I'm the father of a student that's going to graduate in December, 1 semester late. And I talked to him when he came here about there's no reason you can't graduate in 3.5 years. Your mother did, so did I, so why can't you? So he's graduating in 4.5. But I'm happy about that when you look at this, right? I know when we say 64%, that 64% that graduate from UNL. There are others that go on and graduate in other places, we know that. But here's what's troubling about it. If we want the data to be able to determine how well we're doing on retention, how well we're tracking students, what I'm told repeatedly from the faculty is it's very hard to get. It's very hard to find that information and track those students and be able to monitor their progress. That's a problem. And we've got to figure out how to fix that at a university level. So what we have said to the Chancellor is if you expect us to increase this by 1% per year, we've got to have better data systems, we've got to have better access to knowing what students are doing tracking through the system, and we've got to get that fixed. So there already are plans underway for how we're going to go about doing that. I don't know if these numbers are achievable or not. I just threw them on the wall for Steve. I said, Dr. Waller, just see if you can get this done. Because you know, at this point, we don't know what they are. So we've got to figure out what the baseline is first. We think we're better than the university overall. We know we are. But how much is achievable here, we've got to really work on, and it is an area of priority if we can get the data that we need. Research expenditures. IANR's research expenditures, currently 32% of the university's total, 61 of 191 million. The goal for 2017, if we are to keep that position in the university, would require an almost 8% compounded growth rate over those 7 years. What's a concern about that is this number, because that's where we've been for about the last 5 to 6 year period. We may be better than that this year, as I showed you, based on the success we're having, but we've got work to do to help you and to enable you to do this. Last things that have changed is we've had a lot of people change. We're experiencing a lot of people change, as you know. Dick Perrin said to me one day when I saw him, is there anybody left in Ag Hall with you over there now? Because we've had people going to other positions and leadership positions. Susan, as you know, Dr. Fritz is now the Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs in the university system. It's a great role for Susan. She's very excited about it. We congratulate her on having that impact. She's done a tremendous amount for IANR over her history here in a number of positions. I know you know that. So please give Susan, she can't be here today, couldn't be here today, but I want you to give her a round of applause for what she's done. Archie Clutter will join us a week from Monday as the new Dean of the Ag Research Division and Director of the Nebraska Agricultural Experiment Station. Quite excited about Archie joining us. We went through a year-long search to identify someone of his caliber, and we're looking forward to him joining us and forming his team in ARD. I'm announcing for the first time here today that the new Associate Vice Chancellor of the Institute, effective October 5th, will be Dr. Ron Yoder. Ron, where are you? He's up here in the balcony. That's a gain for IANR. I realize our colleagues in BSE are not particularly excited about handing him over, but I will tell you, I've been praying nightly to get a good person in that role. I haven't had an Associate Vice Chancellor since I've been here, and I'm looking forward to a little more sleep at night because Ron is with us, and I particularly wanted someone who had been a department head in that role, and I'm very pleased to have Ron, so looking forward to having you. There are a lot of other new faces that are either coming to campus or are already in place. Deb Hammernick, you know, is serving as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Dr. Prim Paul. I would ask you today, especially today, to keep Prim in your thoughts. He went into surgery this morning in New York. Is the next phase of his cancer treatment. He's expected to be out for about the next 6 to 8 weeks, recuperating, hoping that all goes well for him. So please keep Prim and his family in your thoughts. It's a challenging time for them as he's fighting that disease. Larkin Powell was announced earlier this week as the Interim Associate Dean of the Ag Research Division to fill Deb's spot while she is downtown providing service to the university. Roberto Linton, named as the first founding director, will join us February 1st of the Water for Food Institute, coming from the World Bank. Very excited about him. He was our top choice out of a long search for that position. Very pleased that he is coming. Mark Andrini joined us July 1st to help us in international engagement in the Water for Food Institute, coming from USAID. Some of you will remember Dr. Tom Field, who was here in early August who interviewed for the Engler Chair and Director of the Engler Program. He has accepted that position. We'll start January the 1st with our campus in an overlap period with Mark Gustafson. I think Mark is somewhere here, up here, who will step down out of that position June 30th. So we're very excited about having Tom come. The Agronomy and Horticulture Department has had a transition in leadership from Mark Lagramini, who stepped back into the research faculty. Rock Gasson has taken on, effective July 1st, the interim department head role there. The coming year is going to be an important year for us in leadership transition, as we'll hire a new dean and director of extension. Elbert will retire June 30th. He's announced his retirement next summer. We'll miss Elbert tremendously for what he has done for extension. We have now appointed the search committee for that process, for a national search for that director. Those appointments went out earlier this week. The intent is to have that director named by March so that they will be in the seat July 1 with no interim leadership transition for extension. Beth Burnstill, she said, Beth's up top, I think. Beth had said, when I got here, they told me when Elbert goes, I'm going, we're going together. And that's what they decided to do. So Beth is also retiring June 30th, and we will let the new director, once that person's named, determine how they want to pursue staffing extension, including the associate dean position. Don Wilhite has announced to the faculty here in SNR that he'll be stepping back to the faculty at the end, also the end of June, I believe, Don, of next year. So we have also appointed the search committee for that director to name that person and get them in place without an interim process. Those letters are going out first of next week. And then, of course, we'll have a search for the new BSE department head as well to replace Dr. Yoder. All right, let's talk about 2025 a little bit. I want to give you a review of what's happened and what some of the implementation steps are that have come out of that process. Let me just walk you through real quickly the process, and then we'll talk about the implementation steps. You'll recall I told you in January that we had a leadership retreat in Nebraska City with all of the department heads, the district directors, the deans, and associate deans and assistant deans. Out of that came the idea of the 2025 process that we laid out for you in January. That meeting laid the process out. I was very pleased to have such good, engaged dialogue with a wide swath of our folks across the Institute, much like today, that is a good follow-up for that. I announced for you that day that we were forming 11 teams, steering teams, to guide our discussion around key areas that we needed to take a hard look at in the Institute to meet long-term goals out over the next 15 years. Many of those operational kinds of things, business processes, the way we hire people, the way we evaluate people, the way we encourage and incentivize multidisciplinary work. You'll remember some of those subjects. The end of June, those teams produced a report and a set of recommendations to us that we've now summarized and are moving through in implementation. Late July, we gathered all of the leadership of the Institute, all of the department heads, deans, center directors, program directors, all the way through the Institute, and gathered them in North Platte for 2 days to talk through those recommendations and reach some consensus as to what we felt should be moved forward, how those things might be moved forward, what things required us to take a harder look at in order to implement effectively. Out of that meeting came the desire for us to have more facilitative, participative leadership across the Institute, including all of the unit heads. So we've now instituted a monthly meeting that is a working meeting of all of the department heads and the district directors and the deans in order to work through these things as a group and make those decisions, if you will, as a group. I'm very excited about that. We had our first one on August the 31st. It was a very successful meeting. I think we dealt with 14 of the recommendations in that first session. I've already mentioned Harvey's State of the University address a couple of weeks ago, and of course we're here today. Now, before I go through all of the implementation steps with you, I want to call up a few people in particular to provide a little bit of thanks to them for helping us get through this. I will tell you that those 11 reports constituted a huge book when we printed them all out. because there was tremendous work that went into listening to people across the Institute and across the university and stakeholders out in the state to come up with these recommendations. Summarizing those was a monumental task. I will tell you point blank, because there were lots of them that overlapped. There are areas that overlapped across the teams, and boiling that down to what the meat was a job. And David Jackson, the Associate Dean in ARD, took that on. And he took it on as a task, part of his leadership development process for the leadership foods FSLI program in APLU that he's part of, and did a fabulous job. Those of you that were at the retreat will know how much work and effort that David put into getting us. So David, I want to recognize you. I've got a little gift here for you afterwards for you and your wife, and thank David for his efforts. I really appreciate it. There are 3 other people that I will tell you spent some very late nights here in July trying to get us ready for that conference, and I have similar gifts for them and their spouses or significant others. They're Murd Harlan down here on the front. You know, all of you know Testy Murd in the Vice Chancellor's office. Jill Brown, our Director of External Relations, did a tremendous amount of work preparing us for that retreat, and Deb Lawrence, one of our assistants in the ARD division, who did a good job taking minutes for us at that retreat. So let's thank them also for their efforts. And then at North Platte, when we were hosted for this retreat, Don Adams and his staff at the West Central Research and Extension Center debuted their new educational wing for us to allow us to experience that new part of their facility. So Don, your hospitality of your group online, I'm sure, Eileen Heil and Kathy Fox, their assistants there, who kind of took care of all the work for Jill and getting us organized. So I really appreciate those efforts. They embody servant leaders in being able to help us all across the Institute. One of the other things we asked in the process was we asked the departments, many of you will remember discussions that we asked you to have in June about the goals. So I threw out a lot of big goals for the 2025 process, if you remember in January. They all had 5s and 2s and 1s in them. And I told you then that those goals were placeholder goals for the way we wanted to think about moving toward 2025. We got, I think, 19 different sets of input from all the departments and various programs and centers around these, and Dr. Yoder is now tweaking those goals to reflect the input that we received. We received a lot of very thoughtful, good input in order to re-espouse those in a way that we're all comfortable with. Here's the recommendations that came out of the 11 teams. So we had 11 steering teams. There were a total of 92 individual recommendations that came out of those reports. Of those, once we pulled together similarities across some of the teams, there were 51 that were unique, that recommended change in the Institute in one respect or another in the way that we move forward. We bucketed those into 3 categories. 30 that we have identified for immediate implementation, 10 that we are working out the implementation plan for to do our diligence and think about all the contingencies of what the impacts of those will mean and how to best roll them out. And then 11 that pointed to areas that we need to elevate to the university level, because they don't just impact us, they impact all of UNL. And there's a number of those that are key. At the retreat we had in November, Chancellor Perlman was there, as well as Bill Nunez, his associate. Meg Lauerman, our Director of Communications, was there. Michelle Wade, our Legislative Affairs person for the university, was there. Diane Mendenhall was there from the Alumni Association. So they were able to sit in our discussions and hear what some of these issues are and help encourage us about how we move those forward and elevate them to the university level. Full report and progress report listing the detail behind these recommendations will be on the web Monday morning. You can go there to see the progress and the specific recommendations and the details of the implementation steps that have been laid out to this point on Monday morning. David tells me that I've got to final proofread it yet this weekend, but go look for that to get more detail behind the summary I'll show you in these next slides. And I've already mentioned this first Deans and Unit Heads meeting that we had on the 31st, which is turning into a group that I think will be very powerful for making decisions in the Institute. Okay, let's walk through these very quickly. I'm not going to have time to cover every one of them in detail, but I want you to get the flavor of what some of these recommendations are dealing with as we move forward. This first set deals with human capital, with people, and how we evaluate people, how we reward people, how we measure our productivity. There was quite a lot of interest across the faculty and the staff as we listened in these teams to ways that we can think about better defining what we do, better capturing the rewards for what we do in some areas that aren't clear, and making it more efficient. You heard me say a lot about that in January. So some recommendations: revising the annual review process for our faculty. We're changing that to go to a calendar year. The EARFA data will now be due January 15th rather than the November date earlier, to sync better to a calendar year. We're reducing the amount of time of feedback that will be given to a faculty member based on the department head or the director that is evaluating them as part of that process. We're changing the content of the EARFA submission to streamline what we're asking you to do to capture those data into the central system. We are considering, this is one of those that's in that second category, developing a revised frequency and evaluation for our post-tenure faculty. Do we need to evaluate associate and full professors every year through this process or not? We heard quite a lot of input about that. This last one, the department heads have taken on as a task to flesh out for us, developing clearer faculty performance criteria that are more standard across the system, where those include multidisciplinary incentives. You heard me talk about that in January. How do we include intellectual property and entrepreneurship in our faculty? How do we reward that? How do we reflect that in the way we evaluate our faculty? Standardize the meaning across units of meets expectations. We heard this repeatedly as an issue of concern as to whether we are fairly evaluating across all departments and units what that meets expectations really means. It is okay to meet expectations. Meets expectations means you're doing your job. It's the ones above that are the rock stars. And somehow in our culture, we've gotten to the point where we think we all need to have that rock star designation. And it's not consistent across our units, and we're trying to figure that out and to standardize that in a way that is meaningful. Revise and revamp the staff evaluation process. We heard a lot about that. That is in one of the immediate implementations that we're asking our Assistant Vice Chancellor to lead. Recognition of the need for negotiation and apportionment of individual splits between research, teaching, and extension within units. The bylaws of the university says, according to the Board of Regents, that a faculty member has the ability to negotiate their apportionment with their supervisor, and that is a flexible process. I've heard from the Faculty Senate about this, and whether we are operating truly within the bylaws of the university in the way that we do that. So we've got a little work to do to think about that. And again, that Deans and Unit Heads group is pursuing it. Develop a greater and more consistent mentoring program across IANR, especially for pre-tenure faculty and mid-career faculty, in a way that will provide guidelines across departments, not rules, not stiff rules, but will be consistent across the departments that we have. Acquiring human talent. We need to encourage and pave a way for cluster hires. You will have seen the first one of these advertised the last few months, where we have 5 positions that we currently are recruiting in a water cluster hire around the Water for Food initiative. We need to do more of that. So as we think about how we're going to grow our faculty, if the university is going to increase 160 faculty in the next 7 years, I expect for us to have a lion's share of that. I expect for us to be able to capture a lot of those faculty lines back into the Institute. We have to have a plan for how we do that across those cluster hires. Again, that will be part of that discussion within that Deans and Unit Heads meeting on a monthly basis. So we're all at the table having that discussion. Add risk-taking and entrepreneurship to position descriptions. That's one that we've got to think about how we do that. That's in that second category of the recommendations I told you about. Having a clearer description when we go out to hire faculty, what the package is. We have a tendency, I think, to say that we want to go hire somebody, we describe what we want that person to look like, but we really don't decide what the resources are that are going to be required to support that person in a defined enough way so that we know what we're working with from the very start. And I know there are a number of your units that have struggled with that in the hiring process. Providing greater leadership opportunities offered to faculty for administrative development. We do that fairly well now. We need to continue to ramp that up. Institutionalized formal IANR new faculty and staff orientation, which is something we frankly don't do. Now, some of your departments may do that, but we don't do that at an institute level, and we need to fix that. This top one is one we've got to pay careful attention to. We're in a competitive environment. Every day, there is the opportunity for someone to come pluck our talent and to pluck it away from us. I told you earlier, we're in a competitive position where we shouldn't be having that happen. We should, in fact, be doing the reverse, plucking other people's talent, and we will do that. But that requires a pool that we have available to us that allows us to provide equity adjustments in salary. So we're now looking at that in our budget, how we set that aside in a way that will provide that opportunity for us. Develop a systematic IANR Awards Committee. We've had tremendous support at the IANR level by Dick Fleming in doing award nominations for us. Strong recommendation was that we institute an awards committee that works to bring greater visibility to our expertise on campus, including things like the national academies and other prestigious groups. This one is one that's in that secondary category where we're talking about how can we set aside bridge funding mechanisms for faculty that fall in the crack. And what I mean by fall in the crack is they don't get the funding that they expected to get because of whatever the reason may be in between grants, in between their ability to support their efforts. So how do we provide a mechanism to bridge those faculty in order to get them to the next level? And we're engaged in discussions with Prem Shop about how we do that. Items to elevate here. Fully implement the NU value system to allow in-job promotion and promotion in rank. We're not there yet, and we need to figure out how to do that. Make staff human resources system more closely resemble private business. Now, I know I'm going to hear a few, I don't know about that. And I'm not saying that because I came out of private business. I'm saying that because we need to be more flexible in the way we can respond to the needs. We need to be able to get the right talent in the positions that we want to have in order to meet the goals that are out ahead of us. And we need to think hard about that at the system level, whether we actually have that kind of system or not. This next set of things is all about streamlining business operations. And I'm not going to go through all of them piece by piece. I will tell you that our finance and personnel shop has a pile of work to do in order to get things more automated, in order to make them work in that fashion so we reduce a lot of the redundancy in what we're doing and getting things approved. Okay? So there's a lot of work here. Moving to complete electronic travel processing, blanket travel authorizations. We do some of that now, we don't do it universally. Using people admin to streamline changes in positions or position descriptions or reclassifications. You know, I will tell you, I have this big signature folder that I sign off on every day, most of which I don't really understand why I'm signing it. That's what this is about, is figuring out how to get past some of that. So all we're signing on is the person that has the authority. If you're the budget authority, you should be the one signing it, and it shouldn't require a whole other set of steps in order for that approval to happen, which slows the process down back into units to be able to achieve business on a daily basis. Using NU grant for accepting and processing internal grants, developing an office-sponsored programs user form, clarifying financial interactions with business. This is a big one. This is in that second category. How do we do this? What typically or should belong in the foundation, what should belong in grants and contracts. There's a lot of discussion about that. And how do we clarify that in a way that we have a standardized process? Automating time entry via Firefly, improving SAP data interfaces and approval rating flexibility. I think you can see the work that's accumulating here for finance and personnel. So lots of work there to do that will simplify our processes. This last one is a comprehensive one. I want to know every policy we have, and if there's some that we don't need to have, we need to get rid of them within what ability we have to do that. We can't change the Board of Regents, but if there are policies that we have that have built up over time that need to go away, we're going to find them. This is a pretty recent picture. They took it yesterday, and I noticed they all dressed up for it. It's really nice. Jeff, you did a good job with your shop. But we need to empower this group. There's a lot's going to fall on them to be able to develop these processes, and we're working with Jeff to try to figure out how to help them have the resources that they need to develop these moving forward. Communications, branding, and external relations. We need to streamline who we are. What this team heard repeatedly, both internally, externally on campus, and externally out in the state and the region, was that we need to move to an issue-based type of communications at the IANR level. We heard from a lot of people that said they didn't know what IANR was. Now, there's a lot of people that do, don't get me wrong, but they didn't know what IANR was, and that they were barraged with too much different information for them to be able to figure out who we are. So we're empowering a team to be able to move us January 1 to that streamlined communications process where we do communicate on issues. I've asked that team to develop an IANR logo that has a tagline. We will always be this. We decided that in North Platte. We will always be in IANR, at least for as long as I'm here. But we need a tagline that goes with that, that identifies a little bit more of who we are, and that group's been charged to do that. Reducing the number of print publications we have at the institute level is an issue that we're working on to develop a single kind of IANR external publication moving forward. Something like this. I don't know if this is it, but it's something like this that will be a tagline that says who we are, so people can identify with that tagline as part of the university across the 3 divisions. Transforming food and natural resource literacy. You saw some of this come out, I think it was earlier this week, is that right? Tiffany's here somewhere that's working with that effort, where we put out an RFP for introductory level ACE certified courses with a deadline coming up here in about a month for moving into system-wide food, energy, and water curriculum. This is a huge area for us. It's not going to be easy to do. It's going to require some work and diligence. Steve's team has taken that on in order for us to get this right and to move it out across the system. More here you can see. I'll let you read a lot of this background so that I don't get my wife on my back. Developing a global ag, food, and environmental education center. Susan Williams, who's right down here in the front row, has been working very hard with a team, concepting out how we might place such a center at Meade to attract the citizens in the Omaha-Lincoln corridor and a greater area around that to a science center that talks about what we do with natural resources, what we do in agriculture for food, ag, natural resource kind of literacy objective. Multidisciplinary culture and strategic partnering. I've highlighted the key words for you here. There was a recommendation that we develop a Multidisciplinary Monday program that's centered around multidisciplinary efforts, that we create a monthly public networking opportunity where we bring to campus opportunities for that public networking with our faculty. I can tell you that you will hear in the next probably week to 2 weeks the announcement of the Director of Innovation Campus, the Executive Director of that effort, who will be working closely with us to facilitate that in a public networking way. There was a strong recommendation that we have an IANR business development person within our leadership team that is a go-to person for such kinds of contacts that the university gets, so that they have a point to go to and then get to our faculty and get to our units for where those opportunities might lie. We'll put that person in place. Highlighting and developing partnerships with farmers and ranchers. We do a lot of that already. We need to ramp that up further. These last three deal with how we deal with money. Institutionalizing competitive team, industry, and pilot grant programs like the ones that we've already had in the life sciences, but perhaps on a broader scale. So reserving part of our budget, part of our money for that competitive type of resource across the system. Establishing team-based, competitive hatch projects. That will take some time to phase in because, as you know, the hatch projects are spread out over a period of years in terms of the way they're enacted. But moving toward this model was felt pretty strongly by the input that we received, and that's in that category of how we implement and move forward in that. Awarding hatch state multi-state funds on a competitive basis rather than on a formula kind of basis the way that has been done in the past. Items to elevate here. These are the ones that create the lay awake at night and figure out how this is going to work. Developing consistent, transparent business and university-friendly intellectual property policies. Conducting a review of the structures and administrative policies that may be impacting our ability to make these investments at the university level, in particular with F&A, with intellectual property policy, with royalty policy, and with conflict of interest. Because what we heard from the faculty and the staff was that it's not clear what all of that is. It's not clear what our F&A policy is. Or maybe it's not, that's probably not the right way to say it. It's not clear where all the F&A goes. That's the better way to say it. We know what the policy is. We know how much we get back, and it's not much. But we don't know where the money goes and where those investments are happening, and why more of that investment does not come back to the units that generate those funds and the programs that generate those funds. That obviously is going to be a pretty tough discussion for us to have that and to move toward a more open model as we move forward. Prim has not shirked from this. He's interested in having that discussion, and I'm pleased that once he's back on his feet, we'll be engaging in that. Proactively identify associate and full professors who have the capability and the leadership to lead multidisciplinary teams is a key part of making this successful. Now, these last few deal with community, and I mentioned, if you remember, in the opening slides, the importance of community and balance. And we did hear a number of things about this across the Institute. One was that we needed more listening sessions for people to be able to come and talk about whatever they need to talk about. I think you've done that in the past, Larkin, through the liaison committee, for example. We need to do that in a more inviting way, I guess, to be able to have that opportunity. We heard about creating an informal gathering place for faculty and staff. There are potential plans that are occurring adjacent to us on Holdridge Street for some development opportunities on the south side of the campus that might provide that kind of opportunity for a coffee shop or for a gathering place for people to go and spend time together. We'll see how that develops. The idea here, I think, was that this would be a student-led kind of effort. The opportunity to build a student business or to build a student enterprise that would interface with our undergraduate program that would help facilitate our community as an institute. Developing new faculty and staff orientation and social activities that relates to an earlier recommendation that you saw on an earlier slide. Bringing greater visibility to visiting guest lectures across IANR. Several of you have heard Jim Van Etten's efforts. I saw Jim walk in somewhere earlier up top. Well, in bringing National Academy members from our Big Ten colleagues to campus throughout this school year. That's a great thing that Dr. Van Etten has done. The first one, I believe, was yesterday, if I remember correctly. How do we publicize that in a way to engage our faculty? I am very pleased. I mentioned Keith and Norma Heerman earlier in a slide from a gift they gave us in the last part of last year to dedicate a new lecture series for our campus and for our external stakeholders on the order of an Ian Thompson type forum, where we bring global leaders to our campus to engage our students and our faculty around those tagline areas around food security, around natural resource security, around energy security, around rural community security. You would have seen earlier this week the announcement of the first two of these lectures. Professor Swaminathan from India, widely considered to be the Mother Teresa of agriculture in that part of the world. I would highly encourage you to come listen to Dr. Swaminathan on October 10th in this facility. He's been invited here by President Milliken as part of the Water for Food Institute. I think you will not be disappointed from coming to hear what he has to say in that lecture. Steve Banziger, who you know well, will receive his first presidential chair, the first presidential chair of the university, on November the 10th in a dinner that the foundation will host with colleagues. He will present the second one of those lectures that afternoon, just before that ceremony, about why is agriculture so important and why is his passion so involved in agriculture. We haven't announced the future ones yet. We will do these on a timed basis, but I can tell you the March one. The March one will be at the Lead Center, and it will be a panel discussion of 5 former secretaries of agriculture talking about the importance of food security and talking about what that means relative to the world as they see it, spanning basically 3 generations of ag secretaries that Senator Johans is helping us organize as one of those former secretaries. So more about those. These are the 2 people that we're targeting for the spring. Francis Collins, who we're hoping to get from NIH, the director of NIH, as you know at the moment, was the former director of the National Human Genome Research Institute, was one of the co-leads on the human genome sequencing effort. Stuart Brand, some of you will recognize Mr. Brand's name as the founder of Earth Day, and an outspoken person in the environmental movement, and what his views currently are about all of this area that we're talking about as being important for us moving forward. I just want to mention international. This is the one recommendation out of the 51 that I added, that didn't come necessarily from the faculty, didn't come from any of the team reports, but I see as a huge need for us. We need to engage more internationally. President Milliken has charged us to engage more internationally. One of the difficulties that I saw this past year in the Institute is we do a lot of international engagement, but it's not well coordinated. It's kind of more one-on-one, it's more random, if you will, in the way that it's occurred over time. Part of that is we haven't had leadership in the international program that's been consistent. We haven't had someone really being the champion for international programs because we cut it in the budget, real frankly. So one of the things we'll do, we're announcing the recruitment of a director for global engagement for the Institute that we will put in place, I hope in early 2012, to help us strategize the investments we make in international programs. President Milliken has emphasized BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, as the key target areas that he wants us to engage with, along with some investments in Africa. And we certainly have footprint developing in all of those. I was in Brazil first week of August with the president, was in India with one of our faculty groups in March. I was in China about 3 weeks ago with our Department of Ag folks and some of the university folks to try to be able to begin building some of those bridges that are there, and I'm looking forward to getting that person hired. Now I'm just going to close with a simple statement here. A lot of you have been saying to me, one of the things that I've heard a lot from you as counsel and advice, and I appreciate it very much, is around balance. You know, we all work hard, we all run hard. There's only so many hours in the day, and we have lives to lead, right? I think you all understand what I mean by that. We have some big goals ahead of us that are going to require lots of work. But we have to do that in a balanced way, and we have to do it as a community of people. I think that goes without saying, but I want to reinforce it by saying it. It requires a team of people. We have a huge team. We have a pretty large budget. We have a $178 million budget in the Institute of Ag, if you didn't know that. We have a pretty large budget. We have a lot of investment here. We have 15 units. We have NCTA out in the state. We have programs across the state. As you know, we have a lot of land connected to IANR. So we're a big enterprise, if you will. 1,615 people currently in the enterprise. If you didn't know that number. There's a lot of people engaged in IANR. And I haven't met very many of them that aren't really passionate about what they're doing, about the importance of what they're doing, about the priority of what they're doing, and how they're serving a mission out ahead of them. And you can kind of see how those folks are broken out. So we have to do this as a community. We have to do it as a team. That's one of the reasons you saw me saying we need to put our arms around department heads and be making decisions as a group, because without all of you being in the room, we don't know what we're all doing, if you follow my logic. So that's important as we move forward. And I'll close. This was put in by my wife to remind me that I'm to be in the car. We have families. Take care of them. Balance your life. Because if you don't, your life won't be fulfilled. So I want you to know we appreciate what you do. We appreciate the investment that you make of your time. Make sure you take care of those that you love. And I'm really proud to be working with you. Thank you very much. Now, I realize it's going on a 4:45 on a Friday afternoon, but if you have questions, or those of you online, if you have questions, I think there's a mechanism for you to be able to send those in. I'll be happy to stay and answer those. If you need to leave, please feel free to do so. I understand it's late in the day at the end of a week. So are there questions from the floor or online that I might be able to address for you? Or if I don't know the answers, that the deans and department heads will address for you. None? Going once? Going twice? Have a great weekend. Hope the football team does well tomorrow. Thank you for everything that you do.